We start with Bernie Pinsonat, the esteemed pollster from Southern Media and Opinion Research. He's out with another survey. This one, 9 days before a U.S. Senate race between Foster Campbell and John Kennedy. Before we get to the numbers, and there are some numbers that go beyond the Senate race, Bernie, why has there been so little attention to this race compared to the one 2 years ago with William Morgan Cassidy and Mary Loretta Landrieu?
Well, I think there was a lot of interest leading up to the primary. The December was also anticlimactic because most people in Washington didn't send any money to help Mary. She didn't. She invested a lot of capital.
But that said, there was what? I think a huge amount of money overall spent in that race.
Yeah, but the runoff was the runoff. She had some. I will say this much: she had some money, but she didn't have a lot of ads pouring in here from out of state, helping her in the runoff. I think the runoff was, since she did so poorly against the other Republicans, it was. But it was more than this. But this entire race, except for the presidential, you and I discussed it. I said on your program earlier, the Senate race wasn't the topic of conversation in Louisiana politically. It was the presidential. God help us if the Senate race, we might have got 30% if it would have been just been the Senate race.
Well, last year we only
the presidential drug it along, gave it a lot of energy, and people voted. I don't know what the turnout will be on this race. It'll be a little higher because you do have two congressional races plus a hot mayor's race in Baton Rouge Parish, but the Senate race has never had a lot of energy. It has not been the main draw to voters to go on November 8th, I think it was. So it's been a quiet election since January of this year.
I was about to say we only had 40% turnout last year for a gubernatorial runoff, so you can imagine the turnout will quite likely be low for the Senate runoff. But there are two congressional elections, and before we get to the Senate race, one in North Louisiana to fulfill the seat left vacant by John Fleming, who launched, as it turned out, a feudal fight to become a U.S. Senator. You've got two MJs in the race, Mike Johnson and Marshall Jones. How do you see that one? Somebody named MJ is going to win.
Yes. I think Mike Johnson is the Republican. Somebody called me about some ads on abortion, and I said, in the last 10 years, 12 years, I really don't even have any interest in discussing specific issues in a Senate race or congressional race, because that isn't what determines it. What determines it is whether you're a Democrat or Republican. And it depends on who's president or what's the issues coming out of Washington. And Louisiana has had a very negative outlook towards Democrats at the national level, and we have Cedric Richmond, but past him, everybody's, the whole delegation's Republican, and it's just about sending another Republican to go vote with Republicans, and that race up there is going to be that. The third congressional is about two Republicans, and I think the one up there is, look, the Democrat could do a little better, but nobody thinks the Democrat is going to win. He could. Nobody thinks Foster Campbell's going to win. He could, but certainly the backdrop of the red state with how well Trump did doesn't lend much hope for that. So that's basically where we are right now, with Republicans in basically dominating Louisiana, especially at the federal level.
All right. Now, in the race to succeed Charles Bustani, two Republicans, Scott Angel, the man from Sunoco, and Clay Higgins, the man from reality television. Who's going to win this one?
That one's close. It depends on who you talk to. If you walk around talking to the real conservative Trumpsters over there, the Tea Parties and all of that crowd. They're big time for the what's the candidate's name?
Higgins?
Higgins, Clay Higgins. Yeah, they're all for him. And then you've got the people who are regular Republicans, probably some of the Democrats, and some of the Cajuns are, their guy is, of course, Scott Angel. And so it depends on turnout. I mean, if Scott, who's a household name over there, but he's got to go, now he's running all the way to Calcasieu. But I think, if it's a low turnout, Scott better have his people out, because the Trump voters tend to go out and vote, and if he can maintain that, then it'll be a real close election. But I think it depends on who you talk to over there in the polls. The only poll I've seen was favoring Scott Angel, done by him, his pollster, and it had it basically within the margin of error. So anybody's guess on that one.
All right. Now, you noted that in the presidential election of November 8th, in Louisiana, Donald Trump 58%, Hillary Clinton 38%, and right now your numbers in the Senate are somewhat similar. A closer race, but John Kennedy 52% and Foster Campbell 38%. So what do you think about that one?
Well, I think John Kennedy, the poll shows that John Kennedy should win. The question is how much. I mean, it could go, if it goes below 10%, that would be a good race by Foster Campbell, especially if it got below 5. But most of us think that this is about where it'll be. Maybe, you could end up with you only have 9% undecided. So here again, this poll is done with likely voters. We won't have a likely voter turnout. It'll be more like a chronic voter turnout, which favors Republicans. And if John ends up winning by, instead of 12, 16, or 17, it'll be reflected in our turnout model versus who actually votes.
Question from a listener online, Bernie, is how much African-American support did John Kennedy receive in your poll?
I think it's 9%.
Is that realistic?
I think he'll get. He's going to get 6, 7, and 2% isn't a big deal. But it's possible that he could get. Kennedy's always got about 7 or 8%.
Is it his name?
Yeah, John Kennedy. Yes, and it's a big name. It's a Democratic name. And look, he started out with 30% in the first poll I ran
of African American support.
Yeah, and it's going way down. He is, I list him as a Republican. But yeah, in the head up on the, let me find that for you. The head up with Kennedy. Kennedy has.
You're looking for African.
9.3.
9.3, and what does Campbell have?
78. 11% undecided. So give him maybe 7% and give him 13. And that's 3 or 4 more percent. But then you got the whites. You could say you can give all that to Kennedy, and that's 3 or 4 more points. So those may balance out. But I think it's turnout. The number that'll affect this poll is turnout. But our polling model is chronic voters, which is about 50% turnout. So when you go down, the further you go down in number of voters, and the ones who don't, who are likely, you go from likely to chronics. Then when you get into chronics, you're getting into more of a Republican profile or model of 70% of the people are over 50 years old. They tend to be whiter. They spread out 13, 14%. And, the black numbers drop. Black voters drop from, 28, 29 to 25, 24. And then the whites go up in turnout to, 73, 74% of the all the voters. And that's how these Republicans get up to 17, 16, 18%. 14 is about where it is, and then the turnout affects the rest of it. If the Republicans don't turn out and stay home and don't think that Kennedy wins, that the race could get closer, 5, 6, 7 points.
All right. Now, you have some numbers related to the feud between John Bel Edwards, the governor, and the Attorney General, Jeff Landry. Who's getting the better of that right now?
Well, the governor is a statewide elected official who's in the news every day. Jeff Landry, is just got there. He's the Attorney General, and most statewide elected officials who are not the governor, even Jay Dorden, most people, he was barely in the 50s. He didn't have any real strong numbers. It's Jeff's doing well to be at 50%. Most statewide elected officials are run from 45 to 50, but no, he's not. John Bel Edwards came out of the session at about 50%, and through 2 or 3 disasters, which were horrible, but they certainly helped him. It helped him get a lot of face time, be involved. So he's taking advantage of it, and he and Kennedy are basically about the same. So, being there with Kennedy is really good numbers. The other thing I put in there that's interesting, and I didn't put it in there. I didn't really put that in there, which one is right, or John Kennedy is seen as the guy who is beating. Majority of voters disagree with John Bel Edwards on need more revenue. 54% think they have enough money, and they side with Kennedy. And I went on to say, which explains Kennedy's statewide appeal, thus easily making the runoff. What I'm saying is he did this to Bobby Jindal very effectively. He's done it to John Bel Edwards very effectively, and he's ridden this issue, this deficit spending, and the troubles we've had for 8 solid years of deficit spending. He's ridden this issue into the United States Senate. I mean, that's what he's on the verge of, and that's how he's known. That's why he was able to easily make the runoff against 2 very heavyweight congressmen, 2 heavyweight Democrats, and Kennedy stood out because of this being the treasurer and being outspoken on how we spend our money. It's just been an amazing transformation of John Kennedy into someone who lost twice to someone who's on the very verge of being a United States Senator.
All right.
At the age of 70.
Do you hear at the age of what? He's 65. He's 65.
I'm in 65, yeah.
Yeah, now, do you hear anything about David Vitter taking a look at the treasurer's race?
Oh, give me a chance to digest this race.
That would make sense. That's a perfect job for him. And it would be a launching pad to the comeback. So look out, David Vitter running for treasurer should John Kennedy win. They just switch jobs. That makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Well, nothing surprises me. But anyway, the point I made with the question is it's Kennedy's remarkable ascendancy in the United States Senate has been he was in the right place at the right time with the treasurer, and with the deficits, they've been horrible for Louisiana. We had to cut all this massive cuts and all that stuff. But it just who benefited the most? It benefited John Kennedy into the United States Senator he's on the verge of.
And we're finishing up with Bernie Pinsonat, the respected pollster who's been around for a while, and he's out with another survey, this one a week and a half before the U.S. Senate election between John Kennedy and Foster Campbell, and it has Kennedy with a 14-point lead over his Democratic challenger. Kennedy was a Democrat, remember, for a very long time, and the irony is that he's trying to succeed a man, David Vitter, who defeated Kennedy when he was a Democrat back in 2004 to become a U.S. Senator. Flip-flopping, changing parties, that really doesn't matter much anymore, does it, Bernie Pinsonat?
No, it's you have, of course, at the business level we see it. It's not that much at the in the general public level, but you have Republicans who are, you have Democrats who are Republicans. You have lawyers who are trial lawyers who are jumping into the pool of Republicans trying to blend in, and some of them are being successful. They're really not Republicans. I mean, they're not really the standard Republican for Louisiana. Trial lawyers are aligned with Democrats, but they put that Republican label on them, and some of them are winning. And I don't know how many Democrats will have in the future. I tell people all the time, that this is interesting, and people say, well, I work for Democrats, but it's getting so hard to find a Democrat to work for in Louisiana. There are just so few
left. Your former
boss,
Bennett Johnston, once said, I'll never switch parties and I'll never switch wives, and he's kept his word. Now, you have a question. Tom Schedler, the Secretary of State, denied the Russian government's request to monitor the presidential election in Louisiana. Do you agree or disagree with Secretary Schedler's decision? And I'm amazed that 19.7% of the people disagree. They wanted the Russians to come in here and run our elections. What's going on, Bernie Pinsonat?
Yeah, that was interesting. I haven't really had a chance to get into
that. And I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding.
No, I noticed that. That was the first thing I noticed. But let me see. Where are the 19% coming from?
The 8.2s disagree with Schedler's move strongly. Somewhat, and then 11.5 strongly disagree.
Primarily from, it came from primarily, let's see, Democrats, some Democrats, 14%, 7% of the Republicans strongly disagree, 11% of the Democrats somewhat disagree, and 14.8 strongly disagree. Now you go down past that, 24% of all black voters strongly disagree, 13, so that's 37, plus 6% strongly disagree white and 5.6. So, it could be Schedler's a Republican and not too many Democrats.
So they'd rather have a Russian running the election, Putin, than Schedler? That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't, but hey, I thought it was interesting that that many people answered that way.
Well, it just goes to show you that the electorate and the lack of participation mentally. 5% of the electorate on November 8th voted for Democrats named Edwards and Landrieu, and it wasn't Mary Landrieu or Edwin Edwards or John Bell Edwards on the ballot. Right. It was Derek Edwards and Gary Landrieu, and yet they got 1 out of 20 votes on Election Day.
Well, that was what was interesting. Yeah, our if you remember, our survey had the correct order. Our last survey had the candidates in the order that they actually finished, which was I thought it was great for us polling-wise to be able to say that. But the reason was that the race was so static from day one. Kennedy was the guy. Then you had the battle between the Acadiana congressman, and you had a female attractive candidate from New Orleans named Foster Campbell with the majority of the black vote. But that race really was pretty static, and they were moving around, but they were all within the margin of error, except Kennedy always was 4 or 5 points really ahead of all of them, and it ended up being that way. But you had some candidates who underperformed based on what they had done in the past, like Manus, and then you had some Democrats, because I had Democrats, and you had a Democrat running. So, when you get into 24 candidates, it's just very difficult. I was surprised that we did so well with the top 5 to be that good, but it was only because the race was so static, and there wasn't a lot of energy. There wasn't a lot of issues that caused people to pay a lot of attention to it. So I wasn't surprised, but again, one of the questions that I think you need to look at, and it's going to be an interesting question going forward, and I think the way Buster and I came up with it, and it's a question that the majority of the 56% of Louisiana voters think President-elect Trump should cancel the current government-sponsored health care, referred to as Obamacare, and replace it with the new health care plan developed by the Republican Party. 56 want that to happen, but 33 oppose.
All right, Bernie, I tell you what, we've got to go, but it's a good poll, and thanks for your information. Always a pleasure to talk with you. Interesting guests, intelligent conversation. I'm Jim Engster, and that's what we bring you every afternoon from 4 to 6 here on WBRP.